Over the course, I'd say, the past 3 or so years, the business has completely transformed. What was a predominantly premium display and video ad network has become a company that is almost difficult to put into a category. We build creative for our clients. We own the technology behind all of the ad formats. That creative is then built into all sorts of features, functionalities, everything from using a GPS and accelerometer to being able to play a game in an ad format. And we have the distribution with all of the publishers and apps and social platforms. So the business has really transformed, really pivoted, and we're super excited about the direction, and obviously the acquisition by Perion in December as well.
Cool. There's a lot of talk about programmatic, targeting, and creative being maybe out of balance. What is your perspective on that?
I would agree. I think that when you think about programmatic advertising, when you think about how it's being leveraged for scale, for efficiencies, for audience, for workflow automation. Creative is not mentioned in that conversation. So I think it's at once a challenge, because if you play a little word association, folks are really thinking about it tactically for things that help with efficiency and direct response. And there's that classic, retargeting example everybody uses to talk about, what kind of ads show up in programmatic. But I think it's a fantastic opportunity to talk about all of the capabilities that programmatic can bring from a creative perspective. So to give you an example, we're bringing some of our large, proprietary, high-impact ad formats into programmatic. That gives us the opportunity to take advantage of give our clients the opportunity to take advantage of all the workflow that programmatic can bring, but then also have them be able to leverage their data. Have them be able to develop really interesting multivariate creative messages based on the different audiences. But I think as an industry, we're a long way from it, but I think over the next year or so, it should be transformational.
And what about the idea of personalized creative, creative that's served up to particular users based on their interests? Where does that stand, and what's the work that you guys are doing there?
Sure. So, so the idea of personalized creative, it's been around for a long time. This whole notion of being able to create audience segments and the message them accordingly. I think retargeting is a very basic example of that. A consumer that's been on an advertiser site, then gets an ad that is hopefully personalized to them based on their actions on that site later on in their internet experience. We're taking it from a different perspective. So for us, our ads are oftentimes they're about exposure and they're about interaction. We're not serving an ad to the same consumer 40, 50 times in a typical programmatic example. So what we're doing is creating segments of users that certainly have audience characteristics, but also based on their interaction with an ad. And then leveraging our partnership with Facebook to connect with that consumer in a different environment. So a consumer sees, perhaps interacts with a beautiful, high-impact, large canvas format in their web experience. We'll create a segment of consumers based on how they interact and then serve them a very specific ad when we see them in a social environment. So we've been talking about that with our clients for some time now. We just rolled it out a couple of months ago in Cannes, and the reception has been fantastic.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about how that works and the value to the brand, and just dive in a little bit more if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. So forms of retargeting have been extremely effective for direct response advertisers. I think retargeting has really been how most advertisers have leveraged display with programmatic. But I think it's just scratched the surface when it comes to brand advertising. Brand advertising is about exposure. It's about having a certain level of frequency to ultimately connect with a consumer. So what we're doing is, number one, connecting with a consumer with an ad that we know that they can see. Typically, they're going to be large, highly interactive formats, and they're built for engagement. They're built for interaction. So when we have consumers that are spending a lot of time with these units and doing various things, we can create very granular, very fine-tuned segments based on what they're doing with the ad. So in the case of an auto advertisement, consumer that builds a white car for the with the car building functionality versus builds a blue car, builds a sedan versus a truck. So we can then, upon seeing that consumer in a different environment, serve them an ad that is very tailored to how they interacted with the ad. So it's really thinking about how creative can be used for that type of personalization rather than just what site they were on, what audience bucket they fit into.
Cool. And finally, I wanted to ask you, we're getting ready to go to Mexico. People from all over the world gather.
Yeah.
You've been sort of tracking, been deeply involved with ad tech since the beginning, I would say.
Yes.
Give us your thoughts about kind of where things are. You know, we've been to some conferences, there's excitement, but there's also a little bit of attention around ad blocking, around fraud, viewability. It's not all a happy story these days.
Yeah.
Where do you think the industry stands?
Sure. So we could talk about a few of those and kind of unpack it. I think number one of the big stories of 2016 is this notion of the digital duopoly. You can't escape it. You can't go a week without reading that. So many of the new dollars coming into space are going to Google and Facebook, and that's a fact. But I think overall in the U.S., and this probably compares globally, they're about 2/3 of a giant market. And a giant market that's growing 20% year over year, and a giant market where more and more TV dollars want to come into. So I think on the one hand, yes, they've got a very strong position today, but there's more and more dollars coming into the space that are looking for real brand advertising solutions. And I think there's going to be new companies and companies that have been around for some time. They're going to be able to develop new solutions to really help brands in a space that wants more and more innovation. So I think the digital duopoly and what's actually happening is number one. Number two, I think ad blocking. It's a global conversation, but I think oftentimes it varies by where you are. In the U.S., from everything that I'm reading, you've got anywhere from like 10 to 20% ad blocking, and it's mostly on the desktop. What I hear from my colleagues in France and Germany is they say it could be anywhere from 30 to 40%, right? So I think it's going to vary based on location. I think that ad blocking from all the stats is largely a desktop phenomenon, but there is a whole set of users that are coming online, hundreds of millions of users that are just coming online with mobile and have some sort of ad blocking functionality installed. So again, it's based on location. Everything I read about US ad blocking stats is that it's like 2% or something like that. So this whole kind of death of the mobile web that was supposed to happen after Apple came out with iOS 9, it didn't happen at all. It had literally no effect. I think that there's some interesting companies coming up that are giving Google, Facebook, and others a run for their money, namely Snapchat. I think Snapchat is really an interesting place where a lot of innovation and creativity is happening. And I think at the end of the day, digital's still growing. Brand money wants to come into digital. So from a global perspective, doing this for 15 years now, it's never been a more exciting time. Never been a more challenging time, but never been a more exciting time.